We are here. We are here. And we are here for what is essentially a clarification conversation, as the vehicle is having some questions about the information that has been brought forward so far. And so we will be essentially reiterating the questions that he is bringing forward in order for clarification, and they will be expressed so that the listener or reader is able to easily follow along with this conversation, as it is quite important, especially in these more convoluted and in-depth expressions, that opportunities for clarification are taken. If there is confusion or misunderstanding or misalignment with the current information and perspectives that are held, we are always open and willing for these clarification conversations and for any pushback or questioning that may be directed our way, as we do hold the full understanding and perspectives of what is unfolding. And so, essentially, the first question that the vehicle has is he is questioning why it is that there is the expression of these reptilian integrations with the planet, and why these individuals are portrayed as essentially forms of humanoid beings that are very similar to humans, or they are portrayed as more etheric. And so, what we are wanting to say is essentially, with the technology that was held, it was quite easy for these beings to replicate themselves as what looked to be more advanced, more powerful human beings. And so we are also saying that this is a period of time in your history that was long, long, long before anything was recorded. And so when the expressions of these stories were brought forth in their first iterations of writing and recording beyond just verbal transmission, they had already been quite altered by the passage of time and expression. And so know that for the majority of the time, these beings did express themselves in what was essentially a type of human form. And as they did grow to more of a divine status, you could say they used their technology to create the illusion of beings speaking from the heavens. And so now the vehicle is asking about the creation of the beings. And it was his understanding that essentially the story of Adam and Eve and the creation that is laid forth in the Bible and the Torah was mythological and metaphorical. And essentially, we were saying, yes, of course it is. And you could say that even in the expression that was given by the reptilian being, there was some of its own grandiosity and also clouding because of the mythological additions and alterations that were made to that story through the passage of time and its expression. And yet, it was allowed as it was important for this being to be able to speak for itself. As essentially, we were wanting to show that while there was control and suppression and enslavement and deception, this came from a place of conditioning and programming and biological alteration rather than from malevolent intent. These beings were simply perpetuating what they didn't know and what they had seen and what they were encoded to do. And so you can see how this was also passed down to humanity. And while it may seem as if there is malicious intent in these expressions inherently, by simply the act of doing so, when one is essentially conditioned and bred to believe that this is the way, whether there is anger and violence in this or not, it is still simply conditioned behavior. And we would also like to express that these are very significant experiences to unfold on this planet, as essentially they are carryover and completion experiences from many, many other lifetime expressions of war and enslavement and hierarchy. And so they were allowed to be brought forward into this bubble of Earth reality in order for us to guide the human creations to a sense of completion. And we would also like to express that while there are many different understandings and perspectives on how the human species was created and perpetuated, and the beings that did so and have interacted with humanity throughout its history, remember and recognize there are many different timelines of this, and we are simply expressing one. And yet, this one timeline, you could say, has had quite a few interplays and bleed overs to get humanity into its current timeline expression. For example, while in many of the different timelines of Earth's history, there is the introduction of this fungus, this biological organism that does alter the expression of life forms on this planet. We saw that this was the most cohesive and beneficial one to bring forward, as it does represent essentially the actual events behind much of what is written in the text of the Bible and the Torah. And so what you are recognizing is not only the interplay and intermixing of the more pure human species and those who were more oriented towards the reptilian way of being, while they did look outwardly quite the same, their makeup and their processing was quite different. And again, this was significant as it is bringing forward many experiences from other lifetimes to play out and find completion. And while you may think, if you are well versed in these religious texts, that essentially what was being described was the creation of the nation of Israel, this is not quite so. As of course, there were many throughout the span of this time period that did essentially break off on their own and create their own people groups and move to their own corners of the earth, you could say. And also there was interbreeding and intermixing that happened along the way. And so we are not talking about any one specific people group. We are talking about humanity as a whole when we are expressing these things. And yet, it was significant to give the expression of the original two, as this is very similar to the actuality of events that did occur. And it was important in this as those original two and also the additional ones that were created by that being that for this expression we are calling Enki, as essentially this is the lineage of Enoch. And that is significant, as you know, because of the transcension experience. This is also the lineage of many others who separated off and were scattered to various corners of the earth through the event that you have heard in a previous chapter, referencing the true story of the Tower of Babel. And so this is an expression of influence of those beings who have not only tampered with the natural unfolding of experiences on this planet, but also those beings who did come to support and guide humanity as a whole to and through its awakening experiences. And so you could say that those who were more of the original human genetic and biological makeup without those extra additions of the reptilian essence were more connected with us, the higher dimensional aspects of themselves. And while they did not always consciously recognize these connections, this did allow us to guide them more profoundly. Whereas with those who had more reptilian essence, their propensity was towards hierarchy and control, and they were quite solidly stuck in the physical forms and expressions of being on Earth. And while they were more vast in number, they did essentially gain very strong footholds of control. And we will also express that when those reptilian beings did withdraw from their physical presence on Earth in order to simply observe from beyond the surface of this planet, there was much conflict and infighting. And so the being known as Enki did essentially separate himself. He did recognize essentially a great blunder in how they had perpetuated and altered the life expressions of planet Earth. And so you could say in his remorse, he did essentially have various contacts with humanity in various different forms and for various different reasons. And of course, as you know, your Bible stories have been vastly altered and blown out of proportion and sometimes downright made up and changed. They are essentially echoes and whispers of these contacts, of significant interactions and experiences that humanity has had in its history of expanding itself. It also shows the echoes and whispers of humanity's interactions with what they call are the gods. And you can recognize that most of your religious texts and spiritual religious belief systems have the same echoes and whispers. And yet, this is why we encourage you to connect with us to gain information from us and expand upon that as the information that you have as humans has been vastly altered, has been vastly controlled and twisted, distorted to serve the purposes of those who do not want to see the consciousness evolution of humanity take place. And yet we are saying this is an impossible, unstoppable event to derail. The grand awakening and transcension of humanity is happening. And everything that is being done and has always been done to hamper this and hold this back has essentially been used for the strengthening and the perpetuation of these awakening experiences. And so we are turning to the vehicle now to see if he has any other questions for clarification. And so he is asking us to express upon the phrase used by the reptilians several times as the abominations. And so essentially, it could be said that there were alterations made to certain humans, both through breeding and through genetic manipulation, in order to allow for interbreeding. And so the offspring of this came forth in various expressions. The first few generations were, as was said, abominations to the reptilians, as they were quite the aberration from either reptilian or human. And so essentially, it was not long before these beings were driven underground. In the expression that was given of the major natural disasters of flooding, they were driven into hiding in the mountains and in caves underground. And so eventually, there was more intermingling between these reptilian offspring and the humans. And after much interbreeding, eventually the offspring expressions became what you know as the giants. And so this was very purposeful, as essentially they were meant to be intermediaries between those who lived underground and the surface. And yet they were quite violent and hostile. And so while they did traverse both the underground and the surface, the collaboration that was hoped for between these reptilian offspring and the humans was essentially not possible. Instead, it became a relationship of animosity and fear and hatred between both sides. And again, we are expressing that this was long, long, long ago in your history. Not only has humanity had quite the sordid set of experiences on this planet, but the planet itself has had a very long life expression. And so it should be no surprise to you when we say that this planet's life cycle is coming to an end. The soul or conscious awareness of this planet has extracted itself, much as the soul of the planet of Mars did the same. And so you are experiencing now the long drawn out death throes of a planet that is no longer integrated with a soul or conscious awareness. And we do understand that these topics have not been expanded upon in this work. And yet, as we have said before, all life expressions on this planet hold a conscious awareness, even those you deem as inanimate, such as rocks and mountains and bodies of water. Even the objects of your human creation and invention are able to, and often do, hold a form of conscious awareness, especially now as your transcension experience is drawing nigh. You are being supported and guided by many, many, many conscious awareness, energy, being, expressions, integrating themselves with physicality in many, many different forms. And so we will not sidetrack this conversation by expanding more upon that. However, the information is available. We do recommend that you explore other works that have been presented in quantum session information if you are curious about these topics. And so we are sensing that the only question the vehicle has left is a curiosity about the expression of those who stayed behind in the conversation with Enoch, those who were sent to essentially perpetuate the messages of awakening and expansion, and what did unfold for them, and how did that integrate in with human history unfolding. And we will push this question off as it will be answered in the next expression, which will essentially be another conversation with the one called Enoch. And so we are sending our great love for those of you who are open-hearted and willing to expand your understanding and perspectives of reality. And so with love to you all, that is all.